Well, I hope that you've had a good Sunday, a good start to this week, and hope it continues to go well. And today we are picking up in Mark chapter 14. We had just seen last week in Mark chapter 13, Jesus foretelling the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem, the signs of the coming of the Son of Man. So we covered chapter 13. And now after that, we are told that 2 days go by in chapter 14, verse 1. We're told that after 2 days, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that time of year had come around, and the chief priests and the scribes at this time were seeking how they might take Jesus by trickery or by deception and put him to death. And so they're plotting against Jesus. They're wanting to find some way that they can, they've already been trying to, test and trick Jesus and get something they could say against him. But we're told they're really wanting to try to get Jesus in a situation where they can put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people, because they knew that many of the people thought highly of Jesus. And so they knew that if they tried to take Jesus while a whole bunch of other people were around, that would not go so well for them. So they needed some way to get to Jesus, to get him away from everybody, to get us in a situation they could get Jesus and do whatever they had to do to put him to death. Well, I think Mark sets this up the way he does here in chapter 14, because then we're told in verse 3 that being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as Jesus sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. And so this woman shows up with this perfume or pure nard, this ointment, this oil, very costly oil, mind you, keep that in mind. And she broke the flask and poured the oil on Jesus's head. Kind of thought that would be interesting, as if he's there visiting, and then this woman shows up and she takes this oil and she begins to pour it on his head, a sign of honor, respect. But then, verse 4, there were some, we are told, who were indignant among themselves and said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. They scolded her because she did this. Jesus' disciples are really the ones who are fussing about this. We find in the other Gospels, and really even more specifically than that, and keep this in mind, that in another gospel, we are told that the one who got this criticism started was Judas Iscariot. He was complaining, because he really wanted the money for himself, not for the poor. But anyways, in Mark's account, as they're criticizing this woman sharply, Jesus says to them, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. She has done something good for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me you do not have always," Jesus said. Jesus beginning to tell about what's coming. He's already told his disciples on several occasions about his coming suffering and death and resurrection. He tells them, "I am not always going to be with you." He says in verse 8, he goes on to say of her, "She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial." Notice there, even Jesus saying, she is preparing my body for burial. That's another sign, another telling of what's coming. I wonder what their thought of that was, what their reaction of. I don't think it really registered with them that he's talking about his coming death. But he says, "She has anointed my body for burial." And in verse 9, he says, "Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, What this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. And look at today, in the year 2023. We're reading about it still today, of what this woman did in honor to Jesus. And just as Jesus said, wherever the gospel is taught, what she did is being told also. Well, then verses 10 and 11 reveal that then, as Mark has it set up, it seems to be then after this occasion that Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And so he sought how he might conveniently betray Jesus. See, Judas had a problem with greed and covetousness and stealing. Judas was the one initially who was complaining about using that very expensive oil, but he didn't care about the poor. He only cared about himself. And once that was gone, and in the way Mark has it set up anyway, if we go with this telling of it all, Judas knows, well, now the oil's gone, can't use that. He knows the chief priests and scribes, the leaders of the Jews, that they're looking for a way to get to Jesus. He could get something out of it himself, so he agrees to betray Jesus for monetary gain, because he could get some money. And so he agrees to betray Jesus. And so here in these verses, we see one who came and honored Jesus, but we also see one who betrayed Jesus. And we need to follow the example of this woman who honored Jesus. We too need to honor him with our life. And make sure that we're not following the example of Judas in some way and betraying Jesus by choosing to sin instead of living for him. We'll wait and see what happens next. But here, everything is set in place. They've got their plan, and they will carry it out when Judas finds time, a time to betray Jesus. Think about that today and all that Jesus went through for us. God bless.